Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. The Curse of the Star Wraiths is the debut novel of an author going by the pen name the Lord Otter, and it represents the first book in the Steel and Stormbright series. While I have primarily reviewed comics on this channel, most of what I actually write is prose, and I have reviewed a few books. I figured, why not give this one a quick review, because Steel and Stormbright are the names of our protagonists. And Curse of the Star Wraiths is a mix of an adventure tale and a story of revenge. Unlike, for example, my comic reviews, I read this digitally, so I can't really give you an idea of what a physical product is like, although I know you can get a hard copy of this book. But I do know the physical book is provided by Amazon through their print-on-demand service, and I've never actually seen one of those books, but I've heard the quality is decent. Nothing to write home about. Certainly not something that's going to stay in your family for 100 years or more, but a decent hard copy version of a book. Fair enough. By the same token, Curse of the Star Wraiths is a full-length novel, and it's going to be a bit harder to do a critical analysis of the story of it like I do with a comic project. Even a 100-page comic really doesn't provide you with as much story as you would get in a novel. So I'm going to focus on providing some spoiler-free review and some basic critique that, again, I will try and keep spoiler-free, and really just give you an idea of what to expect from the story, but I don't intend to get quite as deep into the nitty-gritty as I sometimes do in my comic reviews. Now, as I already said, Curse of the Star Wraiths is primarily a revenge story. It is the story of two brothers, Steel and Stormbright, who live in a fantasy world. It is a sword and sandal level of fantasy world, not really a medieval age. It's more like a late Bronze Age or early Iron Age place where we see some remnants of high technology from a glorious past, but most things are basic siege engines, swords, spears, phalanxes, and of course the fantasy elements like troops that ride on giant birds, that kind of thing. Very interesting, very entertaining. Nothing groundbreaking, but all well executed on. There is also a fair amount of magic in this world. It's very interesting, and some of it, at least, is divine in origin. Because it turns out there are deities that walk among these people. They rule over the storm, creation, the stars, the usual kind of things you might expect from a pantheon of deities. So, after Stormbright is given sorceress powers by the god of the storm, our two brothers are carried away by a group of raiders who have come specifically looking for a sorcerer. Now, they don't find Stormbright for reasons that are very interesting and that I don't really want to spoil here, but I find the survival of these two, when people are specifically searching for them, an interesting bit that combines a number of factors pretty deftly. There's some world building there, there's some character development there, and there is a very good establishment of stakes, because we see that our villains are willing to kill in order to get what they want. From that point, Steel and Stormbright are separated from their father. They are thrown into mines to work as slaves for the rest of their days, and eventually they escape, and they go on their quest to have vengeance on General Kerst, the woman who destroyed their town, and presumably on the rest of the society that determined that they were worthy of destruction. We see the brothers visit a number of different places, they meet some very important people, and wield some powerful magic. It's very interesting to see, and there's a fair amount of character growth in there, but the main emphasis is on going new places, seeing new things, and gathering resources to eventually retaliate and get their vengeance on General Kerst. Curse of the Star Wraiths is not looking to be groundbreaking, and I think that's fine. This is, after all, our first outing, our introduction to the world, our introduction to the characters. Having a very simple and easily understood introduction to the world and the characters is a good way to make sure that as we're getting to know these things, we're not also juggling a ton of details that we need to keep in mind in a very tricky plot. Sure, you can do that, but it's not necessary, and it is a very tricky thing to do. Probably not the best thing to do in your debut novel. Otter does a very respectable job of setting up his story and then staying within its lines. Clearly, he does have some ambitions beyond this, but he knows better than to ask us for too much in this first outing. I respect these decisions. He also does a good job presenting us with a pair of brothers that work in a fairly believable dynamic. You have the older brother that looks out for the younger one, and the younger one who is trying to figure out exactly what his place in the world is, especially after he's been given a great deal of talent. Suddenly, and with no real expectation of what he's supposed to do with it. There's a lot of good ingredients here for future storytelling, but we already have one story to tell, and Otter does a very admirable job of focusing on just that story. He tells it from beginning to end, and then he hands us the promise of more to come. Very good, basic, solid story structure. Now, by no means is Otter's prose perfect. There are some rough spots. In particular, he has a tendency to transition from one point of view to another in the middle of a scene, a narrative technique that I'm not particularly fond of, but can work. I just didn't feel it was particularly well executed on in this story. There are also a number of time skips in the narrative, which in and of itself I don't have a problem with. I actually think that is a very good decision, rather than spending a lot of time dwelling on specific elements of the story I did not think were interesting to the main narrative, but they are handled very abruptly, and I think could have been given a little more build up to and then transition out of. Lastly, there was a tendency to refer to the character Steele as a thief, even though we didn't actually witness him stealing anything. None of these are terrible, horrible breaks of storytelling convention. They're just small rough patches that point me towards places where Otter could definitely improve in the future. There's nothing wrong with that. It's his first outing, and we all have room for improvement. Sword and Sandal stories are not particularly my cup of tea, as I believe I've mentioned in the past, but I did find that I enjoyed this one a fair amount, and I am interested in seeing where some of the character development and some of the plot elements that Otter has already established go in the future. So I know that I'll be looking for the next book to come out, and I'll be giving that a read and review when the time comes. In the meantime, my respect to Lord Otter for a very admirable first outing. Let me know what you thought of the book down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.